Welcome back to the Investment Club. I'm here today with Mike Gallagher. I'll let him introduce himself. What are you all about?
See, it's weird because I'm usually the one asking for the introductions on the other end, and this will be our tag team video, audio, podcast, dual medium. But really excited to talk to you. I've been following what you've been up to in the financial world, and I've been mingling out in the sports finance world. I've been blogging at and podcasting at my website, 25th Hour Ideas, writing about things sports and finance, studying for
Nice.
the CFA exams, of course, learning about all this nuanced stuff. But I really was excited to when you hit me up to talk about some of these things at like a 30,000 foot level, as opposed to getting into the nuance of like, oh, I don't want to get too specific with too many and bored people already. But I've got a lot of exciting things I think we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. I'm excited. And LinkedIn coming in handy. Important to have that network. You can reconnect with old friends.
Literally, the one thing LinkedIn might be good for. It's certainly not good for the spam block. But I'm like, oh man, this person wants to connect with me. How nice of them. I click accept. I'm willing to take 30 minutes to meet with you to sell you my thing, and I disconnect immediately. That
Yeah.
seems to be my experience on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I don't even accept if I don't know the person.
Well, I'll start us off. I don't know if you wanted the topic you wanted to hit off first, but you had mentioned, or I had mentioned, one of us had mentioned PE ratios when we spoke the other day. You could set the stage here, but I'm gonna come in and swing a hammer to what the traditional narrative I think is. But please give a little background here.
All right. So I guess our first topic, we can talk about PE ratios. I know we had spoke a little bit about that the other day. And it's a popular metric for the value investors out there. It's something that I'll take into consideration. And for people who don't know, PE is price earnings ratio. Um, Basically, there to calculate, if you're getting a good deal on the stock. Some people live and die by it, and they won't buy a stock if it's got a PE ratio, let's say, that's higher than 20. I don't take it that seriously. I mean, I'll take it into consideration. It's one facet of my analysis, but I don't like say no to a company just because of PE. I think it is a useful metric, but let's see. What do you want to say about PE ratios? I'm sure you have a lot.
Well, I firmly agree with, and you could translate that to more than just PE ratios. There's no single metric out there that's really live or die by.
Right.
I don't think I'd invest in anything or decide solely not to invest in anything based on one metric. But P ratio is interesting because it combines a few things. So it's like you said, price to earnings ratio, price
Mm.
being the share price and earnings being earnings per share. It's one of the most simplest things to calculate. It's what are people willing to sell me a share of the stock for today, and what's the well you always get into the trailing versus leading PE ratios, but we'll save that for another time. But and what's the earnings per share? Like what well, I also take another step back even further than this. Why invest in a stock? If you had to say, why would you invest in a stock in the first place? How do I make money investing in a stock? What would you say would be the logic behind this? Why invest in a stock? Why is it?
Why invest in a
Why
stock?
invest in a stock? What do I get out of it?
Because stocks only go up. That's how you make money. No,
Well,
I mean I would invest in a company. I mean, it depends what kind of company I'm looking at. If I'm looking at like Tesla or if I'm looking at Clorox, I'm going to approach it differently. But so I guess one way of looking at it is, you could say this is a company in a, new and innovative industry that I think is poised for great future success. Or if you are looking at something like Clorox, for example, you could say, this company has a proven track record. It's got a very high barrier to entry. They've consistently grown their profits, each year and, increase their dividend. It's well run. I mean, there's a lot of different things you could look at, but I guess the similarity is that I believe the future is bright for both.
I was gonna say, I think you glossed over it. It's you mentioned dividends in there. There's two ways you can make money from a share of a stock. One, someone willing to buy it from you for more money than you paid for
Mhm.
it. And two, the company pays dividends. I mean, in theory, no company's going to last forever.
Right.
So the expected value, I mean, I know you wanted to talk into discounted cash flows. We could talk about it another time. The expected, the share price really should reflect the discounted future cash flows that an investor shareholder would expect to get over the lifetime of the company's history. And of course, say you're like, oh, Amazon's going to be around for the next 200 years. Okay, well, even if you discount that from the cash flow you'd receive 200 years from now, you know, discount that back to today, it's going to be negligible. So
Mhm.
you hit some terminal value. But there's two methods. Someone pays more for the share, and you get money by holding the share, like dividends. And obviously, like I said earlier, even if a stock doesn't pay dividends, many don't nowadays.
Mhm.
That's not going to be like, I'm not gonna be like, oh, I'm only investing in stuff with dividends. I mean, you saw what happened
Right.
at the beginning of COVID. How many companies slashed their dividend that were like
Right.
seen as like this is the blue chip dividend stocks? It's like, oh, dividend
Yeah.
investing strategy 101. All these companies, you're not contractually obligated to it. A company could be like, no, we're not paying this anymore.
Anytime that they want. I mean, and it's good to have companies with a long track record and dividend aristocrats. But even still, I mean, look at the oil companies. There's so many examples you could cite. Yeah, of them just kind of slashing it because they feel like it or because business is not booming anymore. But the one thing I will say about you know dividend stocks, and I like to take like a balanced approach where I'll invest in my index funds, I'll buy some dividend stocks, I'll buy growth. And the dividend stocks, I think overall, if you are investing in quality dividend stocks, so not a stock that's paying a 10% yield, maybe like Clorox, Johnson Johnson, your staple companies, you look at them when we went through COVID. I mean, yeah, they took a hit, maybe like 20%, but they stayed relatively steady while the whole market went down 50%. Let's say they did keep paying those dividends. There were a lot of companies that slashed it. One of the ones I had invested in that I was annoyed was actually TJX, TJ Maxx, Marshalls. They own Home Goods. You ever shop there?
Occasionally, yes.
I think it's a fantastic business model, but I was a little upset when they cut the dividend. I ended up selling it, but anyway, yeah. So there's no telling. Now that with that being said, they actually did. I forget if they were a dividend aristocrat, but they had been paying the dividend for a significant amount of time. Like it wasn't new, but at the same time, these other companies, while my portfolio was crashing and all the growth stuff was way down, let's say during the peak of the pandemic, J&J, Clorox, like these types of companies kept paying that dividend. So like it does, it can help you sleep easier at night. There's definitely something to be said about the quality dividend stocks.
And you know why companies can pay dividends? Because they have earnings. Closing the loop on PE ratio. You're only paying dividends pretty much if you have the earnings to do so. And logically, what follows is, oh, a low PE ratio means I'm not paying a ton of price for the earnings that a company gets. And in
Right.
theory, those earnings eventually, one way or another, make their way back to me as the shareholder. So you could see why, oh, low PE ratio seems good. High PE
Hmm.
ratio seems like I'm paying a high price for a share stock.
Right.
Here's why things are different than they were back in the Carnegie Rockefeller era of the 1930s and whatnot. I don't want to really bore people's ears off with accounting, but profits, basically how to calculate profits, it's your revenues minus your expenses. That gets you to your profits, pretty much your earnings per se. So, what are expenses? Like what goes into your expenses? For the way that these companies, the accounting works, there's two ways to classify your expenses. You could capitalize them or, expense them for like it's very similarly named. So
Hmm.
capitalize and expensing, the main difference is one, you're spreading out the cost over the expected life. If you're capitalizing something, like say I buy a plane, and for accounting purposes, if I'm capitalizing the cost of say a $10 million plane, however long I expect to use it, say 20 years, I'm dividing out the cost over that life. And
Right.
that's when it's hitting my income statement. If I'm expensing that, I'm reflecting that $10 million payment today, this year,
Mm,
now. It's destroying my bottom line relatively. And of course, there is some freedom to decide what's capitalized, what's expensed, but there's not a ton of leeway. And, you know, accounting rules say this, and like, most importantly, what I wanted to about was most research and development costs are expensed and not capitalized, which is funny
mm,
because a lot of big companies like the Amazons, the Netflixes, the Googles of the world, you know how much money they're spending on research and development every single
yeah,
year.
and
It,
that goes into Amazon has never made a profit, right? They've
yeah,
reinvested everything into the business. Same with Netflix.
but obviously it might not always be the case with all companies, but you could reasonably suspect that high investments in research and development for these companies is going to lead to a lot of future growth and revenue. Yet
Right.
all that money that they're spending, and it cumulatively for all these companies, it's in the billions of dollars. All that's being expensed and taken out of the bottom line today, this year. And you know, to close the loop on this topic, you're basically slashing what earnings would be had all this stuff be capitalized.
Right.
So you're lowering earnings, lowering the denominator of the PE ratio. Say prices stay the same because you know what you think the discounted cash flows that you're going to receive from this business is not really changing. So prices changing, earnings decreasing, your PE ratios are increasing across the board.
Yeah.
But obviously, you know who wasn't investing billions of dollars in R&D, like Dale Carnegie. So
Right.
yeah, everything used to be like labor and material intensive,
Hmm.
and that was the bulk of the costs. So obviously PE ratios back in the olden days were not nearly as high as they were now, and if they
Right.
were, then it would be an actual warning sign. But that's
So
why you got to look at these things with and this is one of so many different aspects you could think about that have changed since then. But it's like you said before, everything has to be taken like in totality.
yeah. So do you think that does that have anything to do with like do companies have higher? Well, I guess let's address this first. Do companies have higher R&D budgets than they if you were to go back then? They are, right? They're putting a lot more into R&D.
Hmm.
And then is that because technology is just advancing so quickly that that's the only way they can stay ahead or stay competitive? Do you think that is a fair
That's a great
statement?
question. There is there's certainly a difference within these costs. And I think Michael Malbison does a great job of in one of his recent publications. He broke all this out.
Mm,
You can't predict, but there's a correlation between R&D intended for growth and a company's success as opposed to money spent, like an airline for example.
mm,
You're spending a ton of money on maintenance. Like your
right.
maintenance, like the more physically intensive companies are, maintenance costs are huge. And you know what maintenance costs aren't leading towards? Future
Mm,
exponential growth. But
right.
it seems like the more you're investing in R&D as a company, of course, uh American Airlines can't just invest in R&D and be like, oh, we're gonna be I don't know, we're gonna invest in leading for the COVID-22 vaccine, or like it's that's just not gonna happen. So the stars have to align here. But
Yeah.
these are some of the factors that I've been very fascinating. It's been fascinating to read about this stuff.
So do you think that like are these astronomically high PE ratios here to stay, or are we gonna revert back eventually? And like, how is that even gonna happen if that
Well,
is?
it's so many different things can happen. People could differ in what they're willing to pay for a
Mm,
share price. Obviously, the numerator can change, the denominator can change, accounting rules can change. I think a million different things can change, which is why it's so tough to have an apples to apples comparison of things in the future versus the past.
yeah.
Very tough, and all great investing really is getting to that apples to apples comparison and making, I guess, the decision that is relatively best, is the way I'd put it.
So like, and a lot of people make the argument then, since I think the PE of the S&P 500 right now average is like 45, they're saying, the market's overvalued. Would you agree, or is it just a totally different ball game now?
I think it's a different ballgame, but like everything, I think the real answer is it depends. It
Yeah,
depends what companies are in the S&P 500. It depends.
and it depends like if they can keep growing to earn, I guess, those PE ratios, or if the growth were to really slow down, you probably will see a huge correction.
To steal from Shark Tank, what is it? Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna grow into this valuation."
Dude, Shark Tank is such a great show. Like, I probably, I'd always seen like an episode here and there, but like started really watching it maybe, a few months ago. And I just feel like the more you watch that show, it makes me a better investor, like in the stock market, because I see, like you just said, that's all well and good. Oh, you're gonna get this much money next year. How much money are you making right now? And if the answer is not good, they will go out so fast. Like they do not want to be a part of that business. And I feel like it just really speaks volume because these are millionaires and billionaires who have plenty of money to spare. Like they could take a chance and like gamble, and they choose not to because they know it's not worth it. If they haven't proven themselves yet, it's too early to invest. And I feel like you could apply that logic and thinking to just so many stocks, especially like whether it's an IPO or a company that's saying, here's our projection 10 years down the line, like that's great, or our total addressable market. Well, how much are you actually making today?
The diaper market, the TAM, is $100 trillion. All we need is point zero zero zero
Yeah.
one percent of that market, and you'll be rich. That's what the
And it's
Shark
like,
Tank.
well, you're not going to get it because Procter and Gamble has a strangle on the market. And yeah, it's just crazy to think about. And this is the stuff that when I first started investing, I definitely wasn't thinking about. Like I would, 3 years ago maybe when I really got into it, I'm reading like one stupid article and it's like, oh, this company's the future, like got to invest, right? And they never
Forbes.com,
pan
they're
out
the
like that,
future. Forbes.com, oh, so and so's the future. Movie
Whenever you
Pass,
see
Movie Pass is the future.
whenever you see an article, this company's the next Amazon, run.
But one of the things I always remember from Shark Tank is Mr. Wonderful is the best of all the
Oh, he's
sharks.
a
Not
savage. I love him.
he's a savage, but he'll always be like, "Tell me the free cash
Yeah.
flow, the cash flow."
Yeah.
There's
The other sharks will like be enthralled and like, oh, this is such a great product. Cavalier's like, what are the numbers? Like every time. Yeah.
but when you think about it, right? Most businesses, there's this thing called like the cash conversion cycle where normally what you're doing is businesses are paying cash to receive inventory, whatever. You sell your inventory, customers then give you cash more than what you paid for it. That's normally the cycle. Cash is going out, then more cash in theory is coming back in.
Hmm.
Airbnb, I don't know if you listen to the Acquired, I think it was Acquired podcast. They do all these like businesses that I think they take businesses that IPO and then they go through like the whole history of the company, break down the business model, all these things. It's like a 3 or 4 hour podcast usually, but
Okay.
you get it done at triple speed. It's no time at all. A-
Right. Yeah. It's all about got at least 2 times speed.
Airbnb has a negative cash conversion cycle. Things like
And
the like
what does that mean for the audience?
imagine being a business and having cash come in before you had to do anything. Like, how would it be? Like, oh yeah, oh, we'll pay you all the money up
Up
front, and
front.
then
Yeah.
you could deliver on your end of the bargain, pretty much.
Right.
But and that's not how hotels work,
Right.
which makes Airbnb, it's huge discrepancy here.
They have a
Hotels,
big
yeah,
competitive advantage.
you're paying after you check out. Like
Yeah.
you're not putting all this money down before checking in. Um,
You could say that, same thing with Tesla and the auto industry. You're paying for your Tesla Model Y that might not come for 3 months, probably get delayed another 6 months.
you're
You
paying
get
the
paid
no
up
no no no.
front.
Wait. It's not like a down payment or anything. You're paying the full price before you even get this car.
You're paying the full price for the car unless you're financing it. Dude, it's genius. And just think about it. Now they have that money. Look, the legacy autos, most of those cars are financed. So even if they do get the upfront money, or like whatever, they get the full amount. Most of them are
Mhm.
financed, so they're not getting the full amount for 5, 10 years. Let's say Tesla's all that money up front. You're saying you're talking a 6 month at minimum. They're 6 months ahead of the competition.
Yeah.
They have that money in hand, ready to deploy wherever they want. It's like how you can't compete with that. Like they're always going to be ahead, and so that's interesting. I didn't really. So how does that work with Airbnb? Just because like you book it and you're paying up front?
That's the thing. The hosts don't have it's not going to the hosts. It's going to Airbnb, the
That's
company,
great for Airbnb.
and the hosts get paid after the guest stays. So, you know, when COVID rolls around, this crazy, I don't know. I'm sure Forbes wrote an article about it, but Airbnb, of course, the customers handed over their cash, but
Right,
COVID, everything shut down. Nobody's staying at Airbnb had like 90+% cancellation rates. Customers get all that money back. The hosts had no choice because they weren't holding the cash. Airbnb was holding the cash.
right.
So hosts get zilch. So all the
Mhm.
people that were
They
holding
got shafted.
the Airbnb frames it like, oh, only a small percentage of people only own these extra properties for the pure purpose of renting out to Airbnb people. But the hosts were like, well, they gave over the cash, they agreed to the terms, blah blah blah. Like, I feel like it wasn't, not that I'm an expert, but it wasn't a cut and dry. Like, say the hosts did have the cash, it'd be interesting to see how that alternative business
I'm
model would have
sure a
worked.
lot of them would be less willing to part with their money.
Well, that's why I'll tie this stuff into sports later, but that's why the sports law world was. If you didn't know what force majeure meant in the beginning of COVID, March Madness and whatnot, like everyone became an expert on it in no time. And
Right.
there were collective bargaining agreements, there were different contracts with venues. If you looked at one of those major tennis tournaments last year, but not others were insured for these kinds of events.
Mm.
So people had all different levels of
How do
of
you buy
preparation.
insurance for that? Global pandemic insurance? What's the premium run on that?
But exactly, like you would think that, like, oh, like why would I ever need to do? But obviously, it's categorized in like, oh, like major natural disasters or
Right, right.
pandemics or all that stuff. But some people have the foresight to be like, you know, if 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 we're anticipating making all this money by people coming to the venue to watch
Yeah,
these tennis matches and all that stuff, spend money on food, maybe we're not
that's
making as much money in broadcast rights, so this would be a huge loss.
right.
You insure it,
Gotta play it
boom,
safe.
you're good to go.
Unlike the airlines who did the exact opposite, had no money in reserve, too busy buying back shares, and they got absolutely destroyed. But if you're rich, the government will just bail you out, and you're all right. So
Well, don't even get me started on privatized gains and socialized losses and how that relates to the airline industry. That is that was some other nonsense from the beginning of
yeah,
COVID.
absolutely wild. And you know what else is crazy to me is you look at the airlines, and like I think I was reading the statistic the other day that airline prices have not changed in 20, 30 years. Like they haven't, improved at all. And just look at airlines in general. Like they haven't changed at all. There's no innovation. There's an industry. I mean, obviously a very high barrier to entry, but ripe for disruption. Maybe we're gonna ride around on rockets soon instead.
Some people are Bezos.
Very true.
I mean, I'll tie this into. I mean, you've brought up Tesla numerous times. I'm just like quickly glancing down at my notes here. Say you were comparing. Say, how important is share price to you? I know we were talking about this earlier. I'm
Yeah,
trying to tie some strings together here.
yeah.
Say I'm telling you, Tesla's trading at, what's it trading at? I'm sure you know off the top of your head, relatively.
Price. Well, it took a big dump today. I think it's like 650, 680, maybe.
Okay, say I tell you Tesla's trading at $680 a share, and say Ford is trading at hypothetically, say trading at $7 a share.
Yeah,
What would be your first impression of those numbers?
just based on share price.
Does that mean would that mean anything to you? Do you
I
do you
mean, I guess it depends on like. Am I a human living in 2021 or someone who's just looking at these two companies for the first time?
But well, I guess the broader point I want to make is someone will see two companies in the same industry, two car companies, two airplane companies, two video game companies. Say
Mhm,
I'm like, oh, I see Activision, Blizzard, and Take Two or whatever, and I'm like, oh, well, they do the same thing. And
mhm.
oh, like wow, one of their
That
share
is for the one.
prices is $200, and one of them's $5. Like, wow, this one seems like a bargain. But
Mhm,
the you're only looking at if it's like I'll analogize this to a pizza pie by the end of this, but you're only looking at say the number of slices in this case. Like,
mhm,
oh man, you're telling me I can get like 8 slices of pizza and like this one's like one slice? Well, what I
mhm.
didn't tell you is that the 8 slice pizza has 500 slices total and the other pie is cut into two. So like
Right.
there's a
Yeah, you definitely obviously you have to look at beyond, that's a misconception. I mean, people see a low stock price who don't know,
and then
anything
this
about
company's worth
investing,
crap.
and they're like, "Oh, this is a bargain. Like, why would I buy Apple for 150 when I could buy the next Apple for $5?" Like, no,
I
it's a junk company. And it's like, you ever read like Peter Lynch?
He's a Stanford guy.
I think so. Yeah, he was the Fidelity Magellan fund leader. He
He wasn't in the PayPal mafia, was he? I always get these
No,
guys'
I don't
names
think
mixed
so.
up.
I think he was. Yeah, I think he retired like before all that. But he was the one who, with the Fidelity Magellan Fund, was able to outperform the market for like some ridiculous. I forget if it was like 10, 20 years or something. Like he got I think a 20% return on average, something ridiculous like that. I actually got his book right
Oh,
here,
this plays
One Up on
great. This
Wall
plays
Street.
great for the podcast.
Great
yeah,
read.
yeah. One Up on Wall Street, Peter Lynch.
Yeah, so this is a fantastic book that like these are principles you can apply. And one of the things he says a lot is that the stock price is the metric that is the most paid attention to, the most followed, and yet it is the most useless. Like there's no
Yes,
reason to ever check the stock price when it comes down
yes,
to it. And he's right.
absolutely. He's right. No, because I could tell you it's just as possible. It's just as possible and would mean just as much to me if Tesla was $5 a share and Ford was $650 a share. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter because the stock price is just telling you what a share of the company's worth. You don't know
Right,
how many shares there are. There could be a
right.
trillion shares of Tesla. There could be 2 shares. The same thing
Mhm.
with Ford. You don't know. And what that's called, when you multiply the number of shares by the share price, that's the market capitalization of the company. Pretty much the total value of all the shares added together. That's what the company is implied to be worth, and
Mhm.
that's an important number. You compare the market cap of two firms. Now you're getting into more apples to apples territory,
Right.
way more than share price.
But again, and this is where it gets difficult because with these modern companies that all this growth is factored in. Like I'm looking here, Tesla's PE ratio as of August 13th is 373, which would make Ben Graham like roll over. He would never even touch this company with a 10-foot pole. But you think about it, and it's like if I had to choose between Tesla and Ford right now, who's going to be around in 10 years? Like I think we know the answer, or who it's more likely. So it's like how much is that market cap? Like, how much does the market cap really matter? I don't know. This is a this is a slippery slope,
Well,
right?
it's a little so, but you could compare to like obviously if a market cap is worth is a if you're $1 trillion company versus $1 billion company, you can compare the size of the companies. If
Right.
it was the stock price of $1 trillion company and the stock price of $1 billion company, you can't compare those. So I
Mhm.
guess that's the difference.
Yeah, and it's tricky too because does Tesla's market cap currently deserve to be bigger than if you put together Ford, GM, Chrysler, Volkswagen, all these companies? No, but if you do look ahead, and you now you're factoring in future growth, but 5 years from now, yes. But and that's where people are going to disagree. But it's tricky.
Well, now I'll tie in another point here. You know what? You know what? You know, hmm. what would you say are the biggest stock indexes that people know of?
The biggest, I'll tell you the three because I hear them every night on Shepard Smith, the news. And again, this goes back to people keep track of nonsense on Wall Street. Every night he goes like the Dow S&P up, however many 10 points, 1 point. Dow S&P and Nasdaq. That's it. Those are like the only three I think majority follow.
Did you know there's a ginormous difference, but not that I put any salt into what any of them are saying. And don't even get me started about saying the difference in points versus percentages. Like that's a conversation for a whole other day.
Yeah,
Like biggest point drop in history. Please get out of here. You know what the big difference is between the Dow Jones and the S&P?
the Dow is 30 companies and the S&P is 500.
There's another difference. That's yes, that is the like that is the big difference. That like, oh, Dow is like, 30 big blue chip companies, blah blah
Right.
blah. S&P is 500 companies. There's another one. How would you think this index is created? What is when the Dow is at 30,000, what is
Mhm.
that?
What do you mean, like compared to the S&P?
Well, I'm saying like
What
why
does
is
that
the
even
Dow
mean?
30,000? Like what is 30,000? What does that even mean?
That is actually a good point because who cares if the Dow's hitting record highs? It's 30 companies versus the
Well,
S&P.
I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is the Dow Jones is taking the share price of all the 30 companies, adding it together, and then boom, it's 30,000. So like whatever company, I'm ashamed to say I couldn't even name probably some of the
I know
companies in
like
there.
Apple is in there.
It's
I
like
don't even tell you.
say Apple goes up 10, say Apple share goes up $10 in a day, and whatever, like I think like Procter and Gamble used to be in there, and I think they might have been
Right.
kicked out. But
Yeah, I'll check
say
that
they
out.
were still in there. Apple goes up $10, Procter and Gamble goes down $10, everything else stays
Yep.
the same. The Dow Jones, the index is staying the same.
Right.
So let's take that to the S&P 500. Say you had 498 companies stay the same, and Tesla's in the S&P 500, right?
Yep.
Am I right? Say Tesla
It's
goes up
like very
$10.
fall or summer, I think.
Say Tesla goes up $10, and like say miraculously AMC fights their way into the S&P 500 in a hypothetical world. Tesla
Yeah,
goes up
it's
$10,
rated. But
AMC goes down $10, all 498 companies stay the same. You would
right.
assume that the S&P 500, the index price doesn't change, just like with the Dow example. You'd be wrong, because they're the two completely different indices. The Dow is what's called a price weighted index, and the S&P is a market cap weighted index. So the Dow, pretty much how we were saying stock prices are meaningless, it's
Right.
only going by stock prices. So
Interesting.
you've
Okay, I did not know that.
yeah, so you've got a certain amount of I don't know if it's not, it might be, I don't think it's one share per each company. Like they have a certain amount of shares per each company, but
Okay.
it's going by, if Facebook's 500 a share, Exxon Mobil's 20 a share, so and so, it's the change is by the dollars per share. It doesn't take into account the market cap
Really?
whatsoever. So if
So
one,
what is it just one share of each or like an equal dollar amount? Like how does that work?
I feel like, I mean, I'm probably going to be completely wrong about this. I should have done more homework. I feel like it's one share. No, because it couldn't be one share per, because 30 companies, it is around like 30,000, right? There's no way it's a share per company. It's multiple shares per company,
Okay.
and
Any
they probably have it proportional. But but I guess the main point is that it's not perfect in that you're not changing the amount of shares of each company.
mm,
It pretty much is what it is. Like it's 10 shares of this, 5 shares of this, 2 shares of this.
right.
So the dollar price that's moving is having an extraordinary impact on what's going on, as opposed to, well, I'm trying to wonder now, I'm probably not explaining this the best way, because I think that negates my whole example that I just teed up. But it is a price weighted index, and we could find a way to link to
Yeah,
the
we'll figure
differences.
that out. Any Dow experts,
Yeah.
please verify and
Anyone whose initials are DJIA, come at us. But it is going only by price. So maybe in the
mm,
setup of the index, someone maybe took into account market cap in as like a footnote. But
So basically, the lesson is not only is the Dow irrelevant because it's only 30 companies, but it's extra irrelevant because it goes up and down based on
yeah,
nonsense.
it might become so irrelevant that it becomes relevant by how irrelevant it is.
Mm,
But take that to the flip side, the yeah, S&P 500 share price is pretty much meaningless in that I forget now within market cap weighted indices, there's some are equal weighted, some are not equal weighted. So for example, regardless of what the dollar price of some of the shares will move, if one company went up 10% and another company went down 10%, which is a whole nother ball game when you're dealing with
mm,
actual percentages, and the other companies all stayed the same, then you would even out and the index wouldn't move because one company went up 10%, the other one went down, the rest averaged out. So it- that's not the same as one going up $10, another going down $10, because a $20 stock, a $10 movement is 50%,
right,
and $500 stock, a $10 movement is negligible. So
right.
you're actually dealing with the changing market caps of the companies with the S&P.
Mhm.
So I will say score one for S&P, boo the Dow.
Yeah, I don't really. I mean, usually they do move in tandem, which is interesting if like what you said is true and it's not really based on the market caps or whatever. But yeah, I just pay attention to the S&P, or they're both usually green and red the same days.
And I mean, but before I make more of a fool of myself for not knowing exactly how the Dow works to critique it like a pro, there was another thing I brought up that is something that was popular that I'd even written about a few months ago, and it's been in the news with Netflix. And Netflix is fascinating. Okay, how many times have you heard recently? Oh, Netflix needs to get into live sports. Netflix needs to buy the rights to the NFL games or whatever. They need to be showing baseball and football and
Yeah,
blah blah
is
blah on
that even like
Netflix.
is that the clientele that they even appeal to? And I feel like that's going to cost a fortune. Is it worth it for
Well,
them?
they go down this route. They're going back to it'd be like for Netflix, it'd be like they're venturing back into prehistoric times when they had
Right,
no show, when they had no original shows, and they maybe were like scrounging together House of Cards and Orange Is the New Black
right,
and none
right.
of the other stuff. You know, how many times do you see on Netflix the logo like Netflix original? How
A
many
lot,
things
a
now are
lot more
Netflix
than I
originals?
used to.
It,
I would say like I feel like it's like 80% of it is or something much higher than it used
and
to be.
yeah, and used to be like back when it first became a streaming service, it was what like 5% of the shows were
Mm,
Netflix shows, and like it was, and until nobody would even give those shows a chance until like House of Cards was critically acclaimed and Orange Is the
mm,
New Black, and I'm sure there were some other great ones back there, but until they started getting like award recognition, you'd be like, oh, Netflix originals, some garbage. But now it's all Netflix originals, and you know why?
yeah.
It's a magical phrase called wholesale transfer pricing power. It's a
Mm,
mouthful.
what
Let's
does
say
that mean?
let's say okay, let's say you own a bakery. You're in New York City, you're a baker. Your investments worked out so well, you decided to retire with millions and spend your days baking cupcakes.
Spending
You
all of my money on rent in New York City. Yeah.
You're like, now I can blow my money on rent in New York City, and you have the you create the investment club cupcake, and everyone in New York City loves it, and it's like proven that oh, you buy this cupcake and your investment knowledge goes up 10 times, and people are like, wow, like, I really need this cupcake, I need to have it, but there's a secret ingredient in your cupcake that you're buying from someone else that you can't make yourself, and they're the only supplier around in the whole East Coast, whole country. That supplier is going to see your success and be like, wow, this person could charge all this money, this person's making profits hand over fist, I'm going to up what I'm charging him for this ingredient 100 times, a
Mm,
thousand times,
there's
whatever.
nothing I can do about it.
There is nothing you can do about it.
Investment Club Cupcake is going out of business.
Going out of business, or maybe not so much going out of business, but all your profits are being captured by the person with the secret ingredient.
Right,
They're capturing all the profits that would in theory be going to you, and
right.
there's so much. I You look at the news, So much stuff ties.
We'll try not to.
Maybe not the news, maybe not the Forbes.com articles about the next Amazon, but there's so many things that tie into this. I'll talk about Apple. I'll talk about Netflix. Netflix was in this exact situation. They become a big player in the streaming game. They're like, well, we need, in order to get more subscribers, to get people to sign up, we need to license all this content. All the
Mm,
content licensors are like, huh, we have all the negotiating power here. You want our catalog of movies? You're paying up. And so
yeah.
Netflix was like held over a barrel. And
So
initially when they started out.
this is a do or die of them making their own content,
Exactly. Their margins on their own content. And people will be like, "Oh my gosh, they spent how many billions of dollars, like how
and
much money."
they're still better off.
They are better off
That's crazy.
creating their own content than
Yeah.
being beholden to the people
Friends
that
in
they
the
have to
office,
license.
and
Yeah,
Peacock, and
than having to
Comcast.
license content.
Right.
Which gets me to, why is everyone arguing now that they should license sports broadcasting
No,
rights?
yeah, that makes no sense. They'll be so backwards. Netflix should create their own sports league and run with that.
No, you're not far off. You are not far off. You know what they're thinking about doing? That people are like, that's crazy. They're thinking of creating their own video games, their own
Okay,
intellectual property, but they're developing it and creating it. And you know what?
right.
I think it's genius. Not that I think
Yeah,
it'll work or that it'll be smart, but not that I would
that is
play Netflix
it's
video
like a
games.
better option, it seems like, than the alternative of buying the rights for sports and whatnot.
There's a famous this whole idea I got from following this guy's name is Tren Griffin, TrenGriffin on Twitter, and he like worked for Microsoft and and Craig McCaw, I think, who is like a pioneer in the cell phone like landline space, all this telecom stuff that is kind of over my head, but
Mhm.
he writes about this wholesale transfer pricing power all the time, and he's quoting, I think it's either Buffett or Munger, where they're like, you know, who has an agent who's negotiating up the price for all this stuff? Movie stars. You're an actor, you're negotiating, you do better, you're upping your price. You know who's not renegotiating their price? Mickey Mouse. The mouse doesn't have an agent raising his price for him. He's a mouse. Disney owns the content. They don't have to negotiate against him to sign a contract.
Right.
It's the same thing with Netflix. Oh, you froze there for a second. Good, because I'm not nearly done with this rant. Let's see. So this okay. Think about Apple. Now think about Apple. Apple
Mhm.
makes killer iPhones. iPhones come out what? I
Every
was
year.
in like eighth grade. I think at the time, 2008. Everyone's got to have this iPhone, and
Right.
it was like the pioneer smartphone, pretty much. You know how many parts go into an iPhone?
Cost like 1,000 or something crazy.
Multiple thousands,
Yeah.
thousands and thousands. You've got these chips, you got this, you got that. Like with we'll tie this back to your investment club cupcake. You know how many ingredients that were needed to make a successful iPhone that there really were no alternatives for? A ton. And
Yeah.
what one of like the highest ranking employees, I forget the name. I loved reading this article about the Apple's negotiator, whose sole job was to go to all these third party companies and negotiate the price to buy whatever millions of chips to go into the iPhones, or
Right.
the casing, or like so many things in the iPhone. It wouldn't be an iPhone without this or without this, and that gave all these people leverage. So Apple slowly but surely is developing almost everything that goes into an iPhone in-house for Apple. But it takes so much time.
Right.
You gotta build. I mean, you can make the same analogy with Amazon. Why do you think Amazon has their own shipping centers? They have they own everything
Delivery.
from door to door,
They've got
because
their own Prime
yeah,
delivery vans
you're
now.
you're taking your greatest, and I think this is the way to sum it up. You're taking your greatest expenses, as like a percentage of costs, and if you could find a way to turn your expenses into revenue, like
Yeah.
Amazon, what if for they would have to pay for the shipping and all this stuff. If you're able to turn that into a revenue opportunity, you're golden. I think
Yeah.
Apple's
That's
done
true.
the same thing. Netflix is doing the same thing. It's
and that's how they're staying so far ahead. I mean, they're doing it all in house, and that's how, just when you think they can't get any bigger or they can't, grow their revenues, they do it again.
Exactly, and then they'll find another thing and be like, "Oh, like why are we paying for this? We're gonna turn this into an opportunity too." I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm no expert in the finance in the payment space, but I see incredible things down the line with just how great of an experience it is to pay with like sign up and pay with an Apple Card. It's the most wonderful user experience I've seen in my life. They've got so many things that I think are possible for them and for all these other companies to do that
Right.
we can't even fathom right now.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, yeah, it's like 10 years ago, would you think Apple, the computer company, was going to be launching not only the iPhone but down the line a credit card? Like, it's just crazy. Like, nothing is out of their reach, you know?
I never would have thought. That's why I'm like I'm not even surprised when the the Forbes.com articles come out saying oh, Amazon's they're starting their own, they're going to revolutionize healthcare with them and JP Morgan and whatever. I mean, the thing, I don't
Yeah.
think it worked out. I think they just
Yeah, they
disbanded
scrapped
recently.
that, which
But
I'm surprised. I don't know what happened there.
but they're trying, and like you need to
Mm,
try these things
yeah,
because I think that's, I mean, another topic for a whole other day when people are talking about antitrust frameworks as to these companies. And I think part of the argument is you're like eliminating competition. I mean, I'm far from an expert on
anti-competitive.
antitrust,
That's true.
yeah, anti-competitive behavior and all this stuff. And then other people are arguing, oh, prices have never been cheaper, blah blah blah. But
Yeah, it's
you know, par-
it's definitely, it's not black and white, because it's like, well, the alternative is the consumer is going to pay more, or like you said, they're going to make it cheaper in house. I don't know. It's a slippery slope, because how much power do you give to them?
exactly, but like of course, anti-competitive behavior. You're talking about, oh, the consumer might be better off today, but are they better off in 20 years based on what the practices are now? I don't know, but like these companies are making it tough to argue. They're putting up a fight to argue against them, in that, oh, like, oh, we're trying this, we're expanding to this field, we're doing all these things that are only
Right.
possible because we're this size.
Yeah. Craziness, and it's crazy, because where does it stop? I mean, started with doing their thousand pieces in house, and now we're going into finance. We're going into
I
health.
But
It's
I
crazy.
would have loved to be in the room with this guy from Apple, and when he's going to these people and he's negotiating, he's like, we're paying I'm like, how do you even do this? Do you, I'm sure some got the carrot, some got the stick. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall for those conversations.
Yeah. What's his name? Do you know?
I will get back to you. Well, once again, with the hindsight of publishing this, if I'm diligent, if I do the work, I can put a link. I know there's an article. I will find it, and wherever
All
this
right.
is released, I'll hold myself accountable to this to put a link for this Apple negotiator. But it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I would definitely check that out.
Well, I will say, as is custom on my podcast, I will have to ask you, and this is very apropos as an investor, if you had an extra hour in your day to be a
Mm,
better investor, how would you spend that hour? You had a 25th hour, nobody else has. Best use case you see fit.
uh, that's a tough one, but I think I would have to go with reading, whether that's rereading The Intelligent Investor, or just reading the Wall Street Journal, just getting insight, or reading the Morning Brew. There's just never enough time in the day to. There's just so much information, and like to keep up with it all, and just the more you'll be a better investor. I would definitely go with reading.
No, I feel like it was such an obvious thing that before I said it, I was like, I would have been shocked if you didn't say reading, but I guess to narrow it down even further, there will be people, and I mean, I'm guilty myself, of course. I love Twitter, but of course, if
Mm.
you're only scrolling through Twitter and you're not reading anything that's
You're
not
just
from the past
barely
five
scratching the
seconds,
surface.
exactly, just like you said, you're just scratching the
It's a
surface.
good it's a good starting point, and I try not to do this. I mean, I think a lot of people. I mean, I'm guilty of it too sometimes. It's a good starting point. Just don't let it be your ending point too. Like, you gotta put in the work.
I start my day and end my day on Twitter.
And you know what? These days, you'll probably outperform the S&P investing in GameStop doing that.
But the points, the Dow, the points on the Dow.
Yeah. Oh, the S&P was up 1% today. Oh, it's down 1%. Market's crashing. Like, no.
Oh my goodness. Well, do you want the honors of wrapping this up, or shall I?
Sure. Um, that's up to you. I mean, I guess we could both wrap it up, and I could cut in my ending from whatever. You can wrap it up. You wrap it up.
Well, for me, I forget to see now that you're putting me on the spot. I forget how I normally. I've been out of practice. Season two. It's been a long time since season one. I'll say thank you for having me on. I guess I will say our show, our joint effort here. I'm
Yes,
really looking forward to continuing this conversation. I could talk for hours about all this stuff. I've certainly
definitely.
talked many people's ears off on price weighted indexes. But this was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, glad to. I'm glad we could do this, and I look forward to doing it again. I mean, we barely, we had a lot more topics to get to. We'll have to pencil in another one, but this is great. I mean, it's a whole new perspective. I can bring to my channel. Hopefully, bring you some good stuff to your podcast as well, and I look forward to it.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for your time.